Chapter 35, The Renaissance, A New Way of Thinking. Do you remember the magic carpet that you imagined in the very first chapter of this book? That magic carpet took you back in time to the days of the Roman Empire. We call those long ago days ancient times. In ancient times, great empires, Assyria and Babylon, Egypt and Greece, spread over vast expanses of the world. The last great ancient empire, Rome, was the largest of all. Wide, paved Roman roads ran all through this huge empire. Traders, soldiers, and ordinary people could travel from one end of the empire to the other. All of the people who lived within its borders followed the same laws. Most spoke the same languages. When barbarians invaded Rome, the last great empire began to fall apart. Cities were destroyed, roads became dangerous. People no longer traveled to distant places or learned the language that had once united the old fallen empire. They lived in separate villages, speaking their different languages, and they no longer read the old books, written in Latin and Greek. They spent their days trying to grow enough food to stay alive and worrying about the next barbarian attack. For hundreds of years after the fall of Rome, the history of Europe seemed to follow the same pattern. A great warrior, ruler of a small kingdom, would lead his army against the other small kingdoms around him. He would conquer them and unite them all into a larger empire. His descendants would rule this empire for a little while, and then the empire would fall apart into small kingdoms again. Then another great warrior would start to gather an army, and the pattern would repeat itself. As these empires rose and fell, Christianity and Islam struggled with each other. We call the centuries after Rome was destroyed the Middle Ages. But around the time that Martin Luther and Christopher Columbus lived, 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, the pattern that had gone on for hundreds of years started to change. Countries such as England, France, Spain, and Italy managed to build strong armies that protected them from invasion for years at a time. The people who lived in these countries didn't have to worry constantly about barbarian invasion. They had time to think, read, and study, instead of looking for a place to hide from the next rampaging army. What did they read? When the Ottoman Turks conquered the city of Constantinople and turned its great cathedral into a Muslim mosque, hundreds of Eastern Orthodox Christian scholars left the city and traveled west into Europe. They brought with them scrolls written in Greek. Some of these scrolls were copies of books of the Bible. Others were writings of great Christians who had lived hundreds of years before. The Eastern Orthodox Church had kept these manuscripts safe for centuries. When the Eastern Orthodox scholars settled down in Europe, they taught others to read these Greek writings. Slowly, men and women who enjoyed reading and study began to be interested again in the old Greek and Latin books that had been ignored for hundreds of years. Many of these writings were translated into languages of Spain, Italy, England, and France. More and more people began to hear about the ideas, the art, and the history of ancient Greece and Rome. Artists began to try to make their sculptures and paintings look like Greek art, which was realistic, more like a photograph. Sculptures began to look more and more like real people, with muscles and skin. Painters tried to make their landscapes look like real landscapes, and the light in their paintings look like it was really shining from the sun. Builders designed their buildings with Greek columns and Roman arches. Scientists studied Greek and Roman explanations for the movements of the stars and planets. Philosophers thought about Greek ideas. We call this time the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. In a way, Greek and Roman ideas died during the Middle Ages because so few people could read Greek and Latin books. Then, during the Renaissance, Greek, and Latin ideas were reborn as these books were read again. But the Renaissance wasn't just a time when people relearned old ideas, it was also a time of new discoveries. For the first time, ships were sailing all over the world. Explorers were realizing that their old ideas about the world, like boiling seas in the south and water that poured forever off the edge of the world, were wrong. So during the Renaissance, men and women began to make new theories about the world. They compared their new theories with the old Greek and Roman ideas. They started to ask, which ideas about the world are right? Let's go try to find out for ourselves. When Prince Henry the Navigator sent ships south to see the southern waters, rather than just accepting the old stories about boiling seas, he was thinking like a Renaissance man. When Columbus insisted on going to India by sailing west, instead of trying to go around Africa like everyone else, he was acting like a Renaissance man. When Martin Luther told the people of Wittenberg that they should look at the Bible for themselves, instead of believing everything that the church told them, he was talking like a Renaissance man. During the Renaissance, men and women began to believe that they could find out truth by looking at the world and figuring out how it worked. After all, they argued, God had created the world. Why couldn't man, who was also created by God, look carefully at this world and understand it? So they observed the world, the sky, the earth around them, the people who lived on the earth. They drew conclusions from what they observed. Today we call this the scientific method of getting knowledge. When you observe something and try to draw conclusions from your observations, you are thinking scientifically. This way of thinking had its roots in the Renaissance.